The Jeep's on jack stands. Alright, so to give you an idea, this is irreversible, guys. These Jeep modifications are not for the faint of heart. And we're reconnecting everything, as you can see here. It's replacing the crossmember. Oh, baby, come on. You could die. So in my infinite wisdom some time ago, when that's a control arm. This will not work with your long arm kit. And I've had questions on this. In the front, what we're concerned with is our caster.
CTI stands for Corner Travel Index. We invented this over a decade ago.
Your wheelbase can greatly affect the score that you have, so you're not really testing it out.
I think we've probably had the Jeep in this position a few times out on the trail. This is probably becoming somewhat of a familiar sight. A perfectly logical explanation for this. And that is that we have some boxes. Crossmember, JL, 4-link long arm mount, lower front, long arm pair. So yeah, it's time. Been putting this off for a while. Finally got a little bit of time to work on it. You'll note that there is no rooftop tent on here, and the reason for that is because I can't fit the Jeep in the garage with the rooftop tent on. And I'm not going to do this out in the driveway because the Jeep is going to be torn down for multiple days. Many of you know I've got a day job, so this is going to be what's happening at night. And I'll take you guys along for the ride as I work on this each night of the week and see if we can't get this long arm kit installed. And there's actually something else that goes along with it that's actually pretty cool. So I'm going to get things started with the rear. And to do that, we're going to be removing the control arms. Pretty much everything else in the rear is going to be not too different from where we're at. We're not going to be changing the springs right now or anything like that, but we are going to be changing out the shocks, control arms, and there's a few other pieces. But we definitely are going to be removing this bracket from the frame, this bracket from the frame, and we're going to be putting new brackets farther forward. Now to do that, I need to remove the skid plates, and I also need to remove the gas tank from in here too. This kind of a modification is probably not for the average DIYer. This is something where, frankly, you're modifying something that now you're going to get in that vehicle and you're going to be driving down the freeway at 70 miles an hour and things like that. If you're not very confident or haven't built cars before or modified vehicles before, know how to use the tools, things to watch out for, you may want to have a professional do it. I mean, as my buddy Scott at MetalCloak would say, you could die. That's not an exaggeration. Or worse, you could kill someone else, right? So be careful. You know, you're modifying a vehicle that is going to be used on the highway. Please, you know, if you're not prepared to do that, be sure to take it to a professional that knows what they're doing. Something else you got to know about a modification like this is that this is irreversible, guys. You can't just go back and put these mounting brackets back on your Jeep. We're cutting them off. They're coming off permanently. It's not like you can just go buy these things and weld them back on. And even if you could, you'd have to pull the body tub off the actual frame, re-weld the brackets back on to get back to a stock configuration. So if that's not in the cards for you, I completely understand. This modification is not for everybody. Something to point out, we are going to be replacing this cross member as well, which is the cross member that holds the transfer case and transmission into the Jeep. Our actual bracket for the front suspension is going to be moved all the way from here back to this location. All right, so to give you an idea, you got one connector, two connectors, you've got a electrical connector here, of course your filler nozzle that goes in here. That's all the stuff you have on the back. And then on the front, you've got two connectors. So one of the things I'm going to want to do while I have this out is I'm going to want to clean this up. As you can see, there's a lot of mud that got piled up in here and stuff like that. But before I hose this thing off really good, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and plug all of the lines with a little end so I don't end up with any water inside my fuel tank. And now I'm right in the middle of removing the control arms. So you can see I've got the bottom control arm out here on this side. I'm removing the top control arm now, and then what I'll be doing is grinding all these brackets off. And I did remove one rubber stopper to make life easier, and I disconnected the actual brake line right here so that I could get my tools in here. So just a couple extra steps, but nothing major. There we go. Okay, just to give you guys a quick look at what's next, now that we've got the control arms out, we'll be grinding this whole bracket off. You can see there's a weld all the way along the inside, and then there's another weld all the way along the outside right here. Our new bracket is actually going to be mounting pretty far forward here. So we'll be cleaning things up here where that new bracket's going to go and drilling a few new holes for that as well. All right, let's take a quick look at what we've got so far. Brackets now are all trimmed off. You can see this is where the weld was, and I've gone ahead and sprayed a quick coat of paint on here to prevent any rust. I'll actually come back and hit it again with another coat. So we've got that set up now, and now we're gonna go move on to drilling the holes and everything for the new brackets. Where the new brackets are gonna go, I went ahead and sanded this as well with the sanding disc on the die grinder or angle grinder to get any bumps or weld splatter off of here, including down here where there were actually bumps in the weld and things like that, because we want the brackets to mount here. They're going to mount, you want to mount really flush and make good contact with the frame rail. Next part is we went ahead and mounted the backing plates that go on here, and this one, as you can see, just kind of slides in, and that is a threaded piece, and it aligns with the big portion here. This big portion is actually bolted in via a big spacer that goes here, and this is what the bracket will bolt through as we mount it on the sides, and it'll also have bolts underneath as well. And then as you look over here on the other side beyond the catalytic converter, you can see we actually have that one mounted as well. So our next step is going to be taking the large brackets that need to mount on the frame that will hold the control arms in place. So we're going to go ahead and set this up here so we can actually drill some of the holes that need to go in. And you can see how now that aligns with the pieces that are actually in the frame. Then I've got a jack here pushing up on the bracket against the frame here, and I've got this bolt just kind of tightened in relatively snug. It's not cranked down, and then we've got our 12mm bolt down here pulling up the back of it, so that now that this bracket and our plates are lined up in here perfectly with our mounting locations inside, so you can see all of our bolt holes, and I want to get that aligned really good. And the reason I have the bracket on here right now is that I want to mark exactly where those holes need to be. Before I go ahead and bolt these brackets on, as you can see now, we've got our holes drilled on the side, hole underneath as well. And what I did was I went ahead and I painted inside those holes. So again, there's no exposed metal. Last thing we want to have start to happen is start getting rust in our frame based on the work we're doing here. And I gotta tell you, those almost look too pretty to get dirty. All right, so I ran into kind of my first real issue here, and it's not even really that big of an issue with the install, but on one of the bolts up here, as I ran it in, I couldn't really bottom it out, and it started to gall itself up. And as soon as you feel something like that, right away you got to stop. And I ran a tap down through here just to clear it up, because what we don't want to do is snap a bolt off or strip something out. All right, now let's see and make sure we can run this bolt in easily without galling things up. Oh yeah, I can run it in with my fingers now. So one of the really interesting things that you'll see with this install is some flag nuts that are really, really long. And let me show you why that is. The bolt that goes in from the bottom here and the bolt that we drilled a hole for here actually have flag nuts that have to go in from way back here. And so you can see the distance from this location all the way to here, and this location right here all the way to the front where that bolt is on the bottom. And you can see where you insert those flag nuts right here. All right, so interesting story on the driver's side. Same one, top one. Feeling a little bit of resistance as I try to thread that in there, and it's getting galled up a little, not with the wrench, just kind of with my fingers. I'm going to go ahead and run the tap through there to clean those threads up. My beautiful gold brackets for control arms are on, and now it's time to move on to control arms.
Before installing the control arms, this is a really good time to first get the fuel tank reinstalled.
Alright, so as you can see, fuel tank's going back in now, and so what I did was I went ahead and lifted the front of the tank up and put a bolt here to hold it in place. So we've got the jack up underneath here, and so what I'll be doing is reconnecting the filler hose, the all the fittings, and the electrical connector now, and we'll get that all put back together, and then we'll finish jacking this up and put the bolts back in place to hold the tank in. All right, hopefully you were very careful and didn't break any of these when you took things apart, because now we're going ahead and we're reconnecting everything. As you can see here, you can see off in the distance, I've got the other one connected over there. Now I'm gonna be going ahead and connecting this filler hose to this as I jack it up, and then we'll connect these last to this and the electrical connector last, and I'll go ahead and wrap my zip tie around the electrical connector the way it was when we took things apart.
I'm setting the upper rear control arms to 32.5 eye to eye and the lowers to 38.25 as a starting point.
All right guys, let's take a look. So long arm control arms are on in the new brackets. By the way, I haven't tightened this up and I haven't tightened these yet, because we want to be able to tighten everything that has a bushing in it that's going to spin or rotate. We want to tighten all that stuff when it's on its own weight. So what I'm going to do is lift the frame off of the big jack stands in the back, and we'll go ahead and set this on the axles, put it again on its own weight, and then we'll go ahead and tighten we'll go ahead and torque everything down to torque specs. So as you can see, got the new Black Shocks, which I'm really excited about, and then the long arm kit, and man, it really opens things up under here. I mean, it's crazy. You know, you used to think the original control arms used to mount right about this location. You can see where the old bracket for the lower control arm was right here. These arms are roughly twice as long, and boy, are they more level than the other ones. You can see the other ones used to come down at a pretty steep angle, and that's kind of the problem, because that steep angle, as you hit bumps, it does a couple things. It transmits a lot of the shock through the frame of the Jeep, and the arc that the axle moves on is more of a curve, whereas this will move more straight up and down in the travel. So that should smooth things out a bunch. And then on top of that, we've got a shock here that's going to hold up to that washboard and stuff, where we're just beating the heck out of it and it won't heat up on us. So let's get this thing onto its own weight and we'll torque everything down. All right, another day in the garage working on the Jeep. But as you can see, I've flipped it around. We're done with the long arm in the rear. Time to start working on the front. And that actually starts with replacing the cross member to a heavy duty skid cross member. You can see I've already got the wheels and tires off, and then we'll be setting the Jeep up so that I can droop the suspension. One of the things that I do on the front, for sure, is I'm gonna measure exactly where my pinion angle is right here at rest on the jack stands. So when I put the control arms on for the long arm kit, I can set the pinion angle right back to where it was. All right, so we've already got the engine skid removed. This attaches to that cross member and then attaches up towards the engine, just below the oil pan, right up here to the engine mounts. So we've got to get this out of the way so we can put the new cross member in. Now, a couple of things that we also have to remove. We're going to have to pull the bolt out of our gas tank skid plate, the stock skid plate. We're going to go ahead and disconnect the mount that is holding up our basically everything in the center, transmission, transfer case, and all those things. And we'll put a jack under this to hold it in place. And then right up here, we're going to have to disconnect or remove from the cross member the exhaust hanger. Alright guys, as you can see, cross member is now out. Transmission is just supported and transfer case just supported by the jack right now. But as you can see, in typical fashion, there's no paint back here where it was located. So I'm going to go ahead and spray some paint in there. Alright, there you have it. New cross member installed, and now we can go ahead and get started on our suspension. Alright, you'll need to remove these heat shields so that we can actually get to the control arm bolts on the upper control arm at the frame. Yep, tighter than hell, but again, that's the torque spec. Alright, and wouldn't it be cool if we didn't need a FAD unit? Wouldn't that be awesome? Oh, yeah. That's pretty tight. One of these days I'm going to get my collarbone put back together. One of these days I'm going to buy me a set of metric ratchet wrenches. One of these days. What I need is one of every tool. Oh, I remember this from the last time. I remember having to actually loosen this guy up and move it out of the way on the soft line. Ah, forgot all about that. Good old 2-liter turbo. Alright guys, control arms are out. Lower control arms, upper control arms, both out. Now they do say you can actually go ahead and remove the catalytic converter to give yourself room here to remove this bracket and grind this bracket off. I am not going to do that. I'm actually going to go ahead and grind this out and this out, both pieces. But what I do need to be careful of is we've got some hose that are tucked away in the heat shielding here, and I need to be careful of that. And on the other side, as you can see, things are a little more open. No big catalytic converter on that side. But yeah, I got some cutting to do. Interesting note, I actually hit the stock mounting bracket at one point here, you can see. And that really bent the bejesus out of it. It bent it pretty good. I'm kind of stoked that the new bracketry that's going on is quite a bit thicker than the stock bracketry. All right, this is a really good opportunity right now to show you guys exactly what's involved in doing this long arm modification on your Jeep JLU. This is not for the faint of heart. And by the way, if you're just kind of a basic DIY person, I don't even know that I could really recommend it. I've, over the years, built cars and things like that, and I do have the right tools to actually do this. But even then, this is not an easy job to do. So let me give you guys an idea. First of all, you're gonna be making a pretty big mess, right? This is actually a welding blanket here that I'm using because the amount of metal and sparks that I'm grinding off of the chassis to get this done, I'm trying to ensure that that just doesn't end up all over my suspension. This stuff likes to stick to things, and once it gets wet, it's gonna rust, and that's gonna propagate rust. So you kind of want to keep that off of most of the Jeep if you can, but you're also gonna be swimming in it, right? I mean, you're gonna be under the Jeep, whether you're standing, sitting, laying down, it doesn't matter. You're gonna be basically in a shower of sparks and molten metal coming off the Jeep as it goes. So definitely want to wear long sleeves, if you got overalls, it's even better. Mine, I don't know where they are anymore. It's been a while. But let me climb under here in my mess and give you guys a good idea of what's going on here. Now I know it looks like a mess here, right? But believe me, I've actually vacuumed this up a couple of times already, just so that I'm not laying in, a complete, mess of metal shavings and things like that. But let's take a look at what's going on here. So here you can see where that bracket was mounted. And as you can see here, there's still a fair amount of metal left to where the bracket was welded on. Now you've got to be really careful here. You want to get this off, and I'll show you why. But you also want to be careful that you're not grinding into the structure of the chassis of the frame member here, right? Because if you take metal away from this, you're just going to weaken your frame in this location. So you don't want to grind into it. So you got to be careful. And as you can see, this is actually getting pretty thin here as I'm grinding down, getting close to the hole in the frame here, but I've still got some pretty big chunks here. And by the way, what's in this is inside this heat protection here, that is your brake lines, and you can see how close that gets. So you got to be incredibly careful here as you're doing this. As you can see, I kind of touched it right there with the sanding disc, and it didn't do a ton of damage. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and put a new piece over the top of this when I'm done. But you definitely don't want to grind into your brake lines or cut your brake lines with a cutting wheel or anything like that. So this whole set of brackets really came off in pieces because you're trying to get your angle grinder up in here. Now, a plasma cutter or a torch could work too, but I'll be honest with you, I'd be really reluctant to throw either one of those up in here and try and do the cutting too. So you just got to be slow, meticulous, patient, and take your time getting this off. And by the way, we haven't even started with the top bracket yet, right? And you can see how tight that is in here with the exhaust coming down and being able to work in this location. So this gives you a pretty good idea of just the amount of work it takes. You're looking at several hours of grinding and cutting to get this all taken down correctly. So you might be saying to yourself, hey Jeff, I don't understand. Why do you need to grind this off so smoothly, right? Why do you need to get all of this off? The bracket that you're going to be putting in for your front control arm, right, or top control arm, sits right in this location. In fact, you can see the bolt hole here on the bottom that it lines up with, and that needs to sit really nice and flush against the frame because it's going to be using that location. And you can't have any bulges or bumps or anything sticking out in this section of the chassis where that's going to mount. So we've got to get that one cleaned up really nicely, and that has to be done on both sides. So, if you ask yourself, man, I don't understand, why do people charge so much to install this long arm kit if you take it somewhere to have it installed? Well, there you have it. It is a lot of work, you guys. The other thing that you're going to notice is you're going to be burning through a few of these discs, right? Cutting wheels, you're going to be burning through some cutting wheels and things like that. And you can also use a reciprocating saw as well to get big chunks of this off. But again, you just got to be really careful, really patient. You don't want to rush through it and damage something else in the process. It's time to get back to cutting. right, so as you can see, we've got this smoothed out really good. I'm gonna double check real quick to make sure that the bracket's sitting nice and flush before I go ahead and spray this with paint, but now you can kind of see with the bracket gone what we're actually bolting to. And so what you can see is I actually touched this a couple times with the sanding wheel, but what I did was I pushed the brake lines up really high up inside there so that I could touch this but not have to worry about hitting the brake lines. Now what I'll do is I'll go ahead and put some brand new heat shielding on the brake lines to protect them from the exhaust, and then we'll go ahead and paint this after I double check the bracket fitment. All right, I want to say that the grinding of all the brackets on the front is by far my least favorite part of this project. As you can see here, things are a little close to the electrical, and I had a barrier right here to prevent myself from damaging any wires. And you can see here, I cut through this is actually one of my wires that I ran, one of my light setups, but I did actually rub through on accident. It got a little bite, and you can see I rubbed through. So I'm going to be repairing a couple of wires here in the harness. Honestly, to be honest, I feel like, you know, after grinding all that off and getting it all smooth and everything, that is probably a good outcome, considering how, frankly, precarious that is in there. I did go ahead and mock up to make sure that the bracket fits really well before I go ahead and paint. I'll go ahead and paint those frame parts, repair those 2-3 wires, and then we'll be on to the brackets. All right, let me share something with you guys here. So in my infinite wisdom, some time ago when I routed the wiring for my Charger 1, I routed it through the chassis because it's difficult to get access to the top wiring harness. But I just ran into something I think you'll find interesting. Your lower control arm mount, which mounts right here, and by the way, this shield is gonna have to go too. I'm starting to loosen that up. But as you can see, that is going to impede. This hole here is actually going to be used by the hardware for the bracket, which means I've got to reroute my cable for the Charger 1. So another hour and about 50 zip ties later, you can see the wiring harness for the Charger 1 now coming out of the tub, and instead of going into the frame back in this hole back here, I've actually routed it alongside all the other wiring right on top of the actual frame. So it just follows the top of the chassis all the way down to the front. As you can see here, we come from the front, or from the back, up the frame member, right up inside the fender, and then we pop out right here with the rest of the wiring right up in front of the footwell and right up into the battery box area, and pop out up here, and now we're reattached. So yeah, just a little diversion. All right, so now that we got the wiring up out of the way, you can see now we can go ahead and bolt in our control arm bracket. Alright, so what we've done is we've gone ahead and put the lower bolt in to hold this in place, and to clamp it up tight to the frame and chassis, I've gone ahead and jacked it up with a piece of 4x4 in here so that this is nice and snug up against the bottom before I mark the hole. Now what I'll do is I'll go ahead and mark my hole location where I need to drill. Alright, we have actually run into a pretty significant stumbling block here that is a little tough. As you can see, you insert a flag nut here that is meant to take 2 bolts that need to go into these 2 holes. But if you look inside the frame of the Jeep, if you have the passenger side safety bar, you can see there's a bit of an obstruction in here that's no joke. That's That's some pretty heavy metal in there that I'm gonna have to remove. And about the only way to do that is gonna be with a carbide burr to burn through that metal. So I'm gonna go ahead and take a stab at that and we'll see how it goes. But yeah, this was a little bit unexpected. All right, so we've clearanced quite a bit in there, as you can see, but still got a bit of an obstruction there that's not letting us get that guy all the way in where it needs to go. So I'm gonna have to clearance that some more, and hopefully we can get through it all with the carbide bit. I'm a little concerned about a little piece up in here that I might not be able to get to, so this is gonna be interesting. All right, let's take a look at this. We've been clearancing that for a little bit, and man, guys, I think we're pretty good. That's looking pretty good. I'm gonna see if that will line up with the bolt holes in the bracket, and if it is, I'll go ahead and spray paint everything in there and make sure we don't get any rust, and we'll move on. All right, so as you can see, clearancing inside the frame for those two bolts paid off really, really well. And now we've got everything kind of just in there loosely, and we'll go ahead and torque these down for our upper control arm bracket on the passenger side. You call that a control arm? It's not a control arm. That's a control arm. Last bolt of the entire long arm suspension right here, lower control arm at the frame, and this nut, as you can see, is a little boogered up in there, and it just keeps getting galled up and heating that up, and so I don't want to thread it all the way on. This is a bummer. Last bolt, last nut, and I'm gonna have to go get a quick tap and die or find a replacement nut. All right, so this is actually an interesting piece right here. What this is a shield that actually protects the fuel lines in front of the fuel tank. And right now, the long arm kit where the bracket is, you can see, let me get this in some light here. Hopefully you can see this. The bracket for the new control arms actually obstructs right here, and it also is going to obstruct up in this area a little bit too. What I'm going to do, instead of not reinstalling this, I think this is kind of important to have because I don't want my brake lines to get hit by sticks and twigs. I'm going to go ahead and clearance this a little bit and see if I can't mount this back on there, but it's going to take a little bit of fine tuning here to make it fit like it used to. All right, there you have it, clearanced and back in place, just where it needs to be. Again, rocks and debris flying up against the fuel lines here is probably a really bad idea, so I didn't want to not have this. All right, alignment done. Now, next two pieces are going to be do the front shocks. We'll put our black shocks on, put our fender back in here on the passenger side after redoing the electrical, and then we just got to put our skid plates back on, and we are dialed. It's been a long few days to get this thing together, but here we are in the afternoon, 90-something degrees again. Great job from MetalCloak, labeling everything. Front side passenger, front side passenger. We'll go ahead and get this shock installed. All right, something really important to share with you guys today is if you already have the 3-inch game changer, for instance, from MetalCloak, and you're switching to the long arm kit, you have already installed some shock relocation brackets that actually move the shock from a stock location at the bottom out to a more outward location, but it also has a certain amount of rise in the actual bracket. This will not work with your long arm kit and the Black Shocks. You definitely need to switch to a newer version. And here you can see the difference between the two. This bracket will clearly not raise the shock nearly as much as this one did. This is actually going to be slightly less rise than what you had with your stock shock. So one of the things you'll need to do when you actually install the long arm kit for articulation purposes is you're going to want to install a track bar relocation bracket where the track bar attaches to the axle. Now, last night I went ahead and drilled all my holes here, and just a note, I did have to remove the brake caliper to get a drill in here on the side coming from the tire and the wheel. But it's not a big deal. It's 2 bolts to remove the brake caliper, then you can get the drill in here, drill a nice straight hole. The reason I didn't mount this last night was because I wanted to get some good paint in those holes that I drilled to avoid rust and let it dry before I actually mount the bracket. So now this morning it's just a matter of putting it on and bolting it in place. Here you can see the holes that I drilled last night that come in from the outside towards the wheel, and we put our flag nut up in here. And by the way, these on this side are a 9/16 hole. It calls for 9/16 on the other side as well, but I found that a 17/32 actually worked out a little bit better for me. So I want to talk about a couple of key aspects of when you're doing a major suspension modification like this, where the axles frankly just become completely disconnected to the vehicle to some degree, right? I mean, you've taken all the control arms out. In this case, I even had to move my track bar with the track bar relocation bracket, which is what centers the axle in under the Jeep. And I've had questions on this on an alignment video I did some time ago. And I'll put a link to that down in the description so you guys can see more of the alignment issues. But in terms of alignment of the rear axle under the Jeep, in the beginning, what I strive for is to try and get the axle pretty well centered. And what I'll do is I'll take a straight edge across the tire and I'll measure right straight up from center line right to the fender, and I'll see where I'm at here. Over here we're at 3 5/8. Let's check the other side. 3 1/2. I'm only actually an 1/8 of an inch difference between the two. And that's a pretty good start. What I'll do is now I'll go put this on a CTI machine and flex the vehicle through its range of articulation, and we'll see what happens. And based on that, I may move the axle to one side or the other a little bit. And that's okay. And if, you know, it doesn't have to be, you know, dead nuts, you know, perfect, like exact, you know, 1/16 of an inch from side to side. The other part of this is, where does the axle line up in the fender well? Now, this is another one that I tend to get asked about. And on the rear, this is important because you've got pinch seams here, and when you're going with a very large tire, like a 38 or a 40-inch tire, you can see I've actually rubbed that pinch weld slightly as the tire came up and into its full articulation here. And you'll find that on the front, you might even get a little bit of rubbing. But what you're looking for is, you know, two things. You're obviously going to want to have the bump stops making contact with each other as it goes through its range of motion, but you're also going to want to take this tire and make sure it is centered in the wheel well so that that rubbing, if there is any, and by the way, that rubbing happened when I took a bump stop out. I shouldn't have done that. I tried to get too much articulation out of it, and so what's happening now is I'm going to work on moving the control arms. It's a combination of two things. you're going to move your control arms for two reasons, you know, adjust them in and out. And when I talk about control arms, we're talking about the control arms that we have here that we installed for the long arm kit. And these are adjustable. You can see a nut on the front on this one that I can loosen and adjust this in or out. And on the rear, there's one on the back, or on the top control arm, it's on the back, and I can disconnect that and adjust it in and out. And you're doing two things with that adjustment. One is you're setting that pinion angle, right? And depending on the drive shaft you have, double cardan, non-double cardan, you're either going to want that that pinion angle to be exactly straight on with the drive shaft, like with a double cardan, right? Or if you don't have a double cardan, most often you're going to want your pinion angle to match whatever the angle is coming out of the transfer case, but in reverse. And that'll prevent any vibration with the drive shaft. So that's the important part there. You're going to both center the wheel in the fender well by moving these in and out, but you're also going to be adjusting them top and bottom to rotate that pinion angle up and down to get it at the right angle. And that's key. So there's two adjustments there, and you may find it could be trial and error. You may have to turn them a little bit, connect them. You don't have to tighten them up, obviously, but you want it sitting on its own weight, and then you'll check your pinion angle, right? And you'll check, obviously, where you're at with the flex. Now to do the flex, I'm going to go sit it on a CTI machine. We're going to flex it out. I may find I need to move that axle forward or back. And you may find it may take you 3 tries to get it right, but you just got to keep loosening those bolts or loosening those nuts, adjusting them, putting it back together, test it again, and keep doing it until you get it right. Another one I get questions on the front alignment. Let's talk about this a little bit, because we have a similar situation here with the live axle, right? Solid axle. We've got a lower control arm and an upper control arm. Here we're not so much concerned with pinion angle. In the front, what we're concerned with is our caster. And that caster is essentially, if I draw a line straight through the top ball joint here, down through the bottom ball joint, I want to know exactly how rotated that axle is here. And if you go watch the alignment video, I explain, hey, you know, we want a certain amount of positive caster, which means it's tilted back, not forward, but back. Now, what I'm looking for typically is about 6 degrees or more. You don't want to go too far, because if you get up to 8-9 degrees, the steering wheel is going to feel really heavy. It's going to get harder to turn, right? And if you get too light, it's going to be really easy to turn, but the vehicle may drift all over the road because of it. So you're looking for at least 6 degrees. And there's a couple ways you can check that. You can actually put a magnetic angle finder right here on top of the ball joint at the top. That'll give you a pretty good idea, right? Or you can check the space right here on the axle, on the differential. You'll see the big hole there. There's a flat spot. You can put it there. But the key is, remember, you've got to be sitting on flat ground. The vehicle has to be level. It's 6 degrees based on, you know, level ground, or the vehicle being level. So that 6 degrees is important. And what people ask, so can I do that with just an adjustable lower? Or do I need an adjustable upper too? Well, the answer is, it depends. Let me explain. Let's say I only have an adjustable lower. That means my front is my top one is stationary. My upper control arm is stationary. I can't move that in and out. Now, if I need to move the whole axle forward or back to make sure that my bump stops are lined up, which is one thing, you know, we want the bump stops to make contact, but we also, again, want that wheel centered in the fender here, so that under full flex and turning, I'm not rubbing the fender back here. I'm not rubbing, you know, any parts up in here. We want that wheel centered in here, right? If I can't accomplish that and get my caster aligned, my caster set up correctly by just adjusting the bottom control arm, the combination of those two things, then I would need an adjustable upper control arm. And that's why it depends. So can you get by with just an adjustable lower? On a small lift, like a 2-inch lift or 2.5-inch lift, probably, as long as that upper control arm puts the axle back somewhere pretty close to stock, right? In terms of alignment. If it doesn't, if that upper control arm that you have is too short or too long, and you can't get that caster set right while also keeping the wheels centered in the fender well, you're kind of out of luck, and you really need an adjustable upper too. And I think that's pretty uncommon with small lifts, but I just wanted to make that really, really clear, because I get that question, and hopefully that answers it.
All right, so
we've done all our work. We've got the suspension installed, everything pretty well aligned. Caster set, and I gotta tell you, let's start with the driving. I'm intentionally hitting some pretty big potholes today that normally I would avoid, just because, you know, it sends that, it transmits all that vibration into the Jeep. You know, it sounds funny, right? Avoiding potholes with the Jeep. But, you know, when you're driving on the road at speed, you want a smooth ride. And I gotta tell you, man, I am noticing a pretty freaking big difference between the long arm and the Game Changer kit on that. And remember, this is why we did it, right? Those rough high-speed roads out in the desert, not so much rock crawling, but the, you know, the more overlandy type stuff where we're trying to cover some ground in rough terrain. And man, it's pretty Cadillac, you guys. It's definitely smoother by far. Hit some really big things that I normally avoid on the roads that I drive frequently, and I'm intentionally running over them now just to see the difference, and it's pretty remarkable. We are on our way down to MetalCloak today. We're gonna go ahead and put the Jeep on the CTI machine and flex it out and see how things line up. There's a few things I like to check here, or want to check here. One is brake lines, right? When you're articulating a lot and those axles droop really, really far, you want to be sure that your brake lines aren't getting tugged on or stretched. Electrical lines to the e-lockers, you know, you've got electrical lines that run down to the differentials to control the lockers on the front and rear. You want to be sure those aren't getting tugged on or stressed. And then of course clearance, right? We want to be sure our clearance is really, really good in the fender wells. Our axles are positioned in a good spot to avoid, you know, tire rub on the front, the rear, both fenders, everywhere. And that's kind of what we'll look at today. And secondarily, maybe we'll get some kind of a CTI score. I don't know. We'll see. We'll measure. But remember, although we do end up rock crawling, it's not the primary focus of the Jeep for us. We do overland in it. At the same time, it's nice to know how well your Jeep flexes. But that's where we're going today, and I'm taking you guys along for the ride so you can see how this works. All right, so we are cruising along here at about 71 right now, 71 miles an hour on the freeway. Man, the steering, I can drive this thing with one finger. It's literally so smooth. Steering feels not heavy, not too light, but not heavy. Tracks really straight down the road, and man, I got to tell you, I'm pretty pleased with the way this suspension feels on the highway. Again, just everything a little more smooth, a little more compliant than it used to be. Pretty awesome. All right, so here's a good example, guys. You can see on the front, we're already at the fender here and hitting here, but in the back, we've got some space, about 1 inch. So what we'll wanna do when we get this off is we're gonna wanna push that rear axle back about 1 inch on the driver's side for sure. And you can see the flex. We've still got some room on the control arms here. We're good. All right, so as you can see, we've got a lot of clearance on the fender here, all the way in the back, and that's cranked to the right on the passenger, and our bump stop is right there. So that looks pretty good. All right. So this side's looking a little bit better than the other side. You can see we're just touching on the front and on the back. Got about, looks like not much, maybe a 1/4, 3/8 of an inch clearance, but that's stuffed up in the fender pretty good there. That's looking really good. That's pretty darn good articulation, guys, front and rear. I'm pretty stoked considering what we're doing here. And you gotta remember, this isn't gonna be the best articulation because the red shocks are actually better, and then the 6-packs are even better than that. So this is pretty awesome for an overlanding rig. I'm pretty stoked. Yeah, we'll get some numbers. I'm not expecting to set any records here, obviously, but it'll be cool. So Mike, tell me more about the CTI. What are we doing here exactly?
So CTI, it stands for Corner Travel Index. We invented this over a decade ago to test out suspensions. We can take a Jeep, put it up and flex it out to its max. Someone can come along, a customer can come along, look in there safely in a safe environment, see where things are binding up so they can make improvements. We can also measure all 4 corners and provide a number, which we call a CTI score. The advantage of that is that you have this number. Now if you go in and make modifications, you change tire size, you change springs, coils, shocks, whatever, you can see if that number goes up or goes down. But really the advantage is to crawl out, get around, look around it, see where things are binding up, see where you can make improvements to get better flex without binding.
Awesome, awesome. That's perfect. Yeah, seeing where it's rubbing potentially a fender. Honestly, my big concern, I think I shared this with Scott in the past, was that I was always concerned that my brake lines might be getting tugged on or something like that when we're at full droop. So being able to see that and make sure that those things are safe, the e-brake cables in the rear after relocating those, I mean, all that stuff makes a difference. And you can't do this at home. You can't figure it out. And I think your key was the fact that you can actually do opposite corners. That's a big deal, right? A lot of people will just pull up one side.
Right.
And why does that matter, Scott?
Well, the reason it matters is like the old style of measuring your travel was called an RTI, or a ramp travel index. The problem with the ramp travel index is when you're doing just one tire, your wheelbase can greatly affect the score that you have. So you're not really testing it out.
Gotcha.
So when you're doing opposite corners like this, it does not matter what your wheelbase is. It's going to give you the maximum amount of stress on your suspension to really show you where the problems lie or where you're really doing things right.
That's awesome.
One of the things I'll mention too is that people get caught up in the score. The score is really just it's a baseline. People try to outdo their buddies, but every Jeep, every rig is different. Like my 2-door, very similar build on short arm, scores almost exactly what yours does on a long arm.
Wow.
With similar tire sizes.
That's impressive.
Shorter wheelbases tend to score lower, longer, better. But yeah, you'll get someone who like, hey, I scored a 900 last year, but I put on 40s and now I'm only getting an 800. Well, it's because bigger tires don't stuck as well.
Yeah, really good point. So many variables. Yeah, ton of variables.
What we see the most of on the CTI trailer where we're helping people out is track bars hitting frames.
Oh yeah.
Wheels obviously into fenders or fender liners. We see problems with springs not being long enough, so they fall out of pocket.
Oh yeah.
Had a spring just recently
just fall out in the ground.
Flexed it out.
Yeah.
It was too short.
Imagine that happening on the trail.
Right.
That happens. Yeah.
And then on the back end, same thing. Inner fender liners, brake lines not being long enough. Your sway bar disconnects coming up and hitting into the fender line.
Oh yeah.
The frame.
Yep.
So that's why we do this, so you can see these little issues.
And what about shock interference?
Shock interference. So a lot of the times, one of our best-selling little products is our shock relocation bracket, because people put on these shocks
on the front.
On the front.
Yeah.
Because what happens is, as your suspension comes up, your axle is going to shift, right?
Right.
And it throws the shock into the frame.
Yep.
We relocate the bottom out so that it has clearance.
Got it.
Yeah, you can always add bump stops, and for an overlander, you don't necessarily need the ultimate amount of flex. You want ride quality, you want load capacity.
Yep,
right?
exactly.
So a couple extra bump stops isn't gonna hurt.
Awesome.
So, looks good.
Thanks, guys. So we just installed the Black Shocks here, right? And I'm a big fan already based on the ride down here just today, right? So the ride is really good. Gas charged shock, it's pretty good.
It's a phenomenal shock. It gives you a lot of performance and a lot of different options. So you can set it up to be stiffer, softer, depending on your load carrying needs.
Yep.
However, because it's a more complex shock, there's more internals in there, you are gonna lose travel because there's just no place to put all the internals. So like on a Rocksport Red Shock, it's got a tremendous amount of travel and a pretty good ride for the cost. I mean, it's pretty hard to beat when it comes to dollars for performance.
Yep.
A Rocksport Red Shock is really nice. However, it's a little bit softer. Then you go into like a 6-pack shock. You're not gonna find a longer travel bolt-on shock, period. It's just not gonna happen.
Right.
So, but you do lose the adjustability of it. So you have to have that set up for whatever your weight carrying capacity is. This is what I like to show here with the CTI is we're actually engineers. We take a look at this and then we try to find problems with our product and we come up with solutions like the shock brackets to move them outboard from the frame so you're not binding. Like our track bar brackets, bends everything that we do in our kits, makes it into a better performing system.
That was one of the things that Will pointed out too, was I almost wasn't going to use this track bar relocation because I didn't need it on the Game Changer, right? But Will said, no, that little tiny bit of difference when you're in full articulation is it's gonna matter now that we've got the long arm kit on here. So those little touches to relocate that track bar to a safer spot, that's a big freaking deal.
It's a big deal, and a lot of companies, you know, they might have a lesser expensive version of a suspension system. However, we include all the parts into the kits, or at least give you options. You know, hey, is this gonna make it 5%, 10% better? Well, if it is, we're gonna allow you to have that option to put it into your system.
Yep, that's awesome. Yeah, this is really cool, Scott.
Cool, well, I'm glad you're stoked. I'm stoked for you.
That's awesome, dude. So now you can actually see where we are on the bump stop.
Jeff, I don't know if you got this shot, like this angle shot. That looks pretty impressive. I mean, for an overland rig, that's pretty good.
It's just an overland rig.
It's just an overland rig.
That's funny.
Mall crawler.
Yeah, mall crawler. It's pretty cool.
I mean, if you're crawling over cars.
So this is what you'd get with just an RTI, ramp travel index, right? You just, this is what you guys see a lot of guys do with forklifts and stuff like that when they're trying to show what kind of articulation they're getting.
Right.
So I think we've probably had the Jeep in this position a few times out on the trail. But yeah, that's a big difference. So now you guys can see the delta between CTI and RTI. Yeah, that's pretty impressive, guys. So if you're ever wondering, is a long arm kit for me, and you want to know what it's capable of, this is a pretty good idea. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's gonna crawl just fine. For a sad overlander like me, I think we'll be okay.